That was one of the bloodiest battles of the First World War. Hundreds of thousands of young men were killed or wounded during the Battle of the Somme.
Ahead of Armistice Day, an artist has made it his mission to remember the fallen in a unique way. He's creating more than 72,000 figurines, one for each of the men whose bodies were never found. John Maguire has more.
It was called the War to End All Wars, and when you see this physical representation of 19,240, the number of men killed on just the first day at the Battle of the Somme, you understand how unimaginable any future wars would have been. But we know different. This is the artist Rob Hurd's tribute to those who lost their lives.
It's so important that that number is physicalised in any way it can be. You know, to understand that these aren't just numbers. These were men, and they still are.
The first shrouds were laid out in Exeter and Bristol last autumn.
Each figure deserves its moment in time.
And for the past 4 years, Rob has covered these figurines, plastic and with flexible joints to allow a natural form, in the tiny hand-stitched shrouds. He's working 12 hours a day, self-funded, and now has a new goal, 72,396, one for every man who died at the Somme and whose bodies were never recovered.
When you understand, or you try and think what these men suffered, how these men died, they didn't die easy, they died hard. And I think, how can I say this is hard work when you're dealing with that? You know, and gives me a great sense of perspective.
When you think about all the lives that were lost, yeah, it brings it into focus.
Noel Young's great-uncle died on that first day. 19-year-old Ronald was never found.
My grandfather never talked about it, and when I spoke to my father about it, he said it was a conversation he never had, and I can only assume that it was probably too tough to talk about. It's so important that we remember these things, that these faces are not just forgotten, and what they did for us and for the future.
And there's interest from a new generation 100 years on. These A-level students, the same age as some who fought in the Great War, are studying Rob's work. The Shrouds of the Somme will be laid out in the Queen Elizabeth Olympic Park in London to mark the centenary of the First World War's end. And today there's a public appeal for any family personal information about the 72,000.
We hope that people will be inspired by Rob's artwork, just as we were, to go out and find out more about these people, to put faces to those names, to put life back into the dead. And so that's why we're really proud to be working with Shrouds of the Somme, to ask the nation to go and seek out these stories and to help us retell these stories for a new generation.
Rob has placed all the names on these boards. He's committed to creating a shroud for each man, one by one, to make hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, lest we forget. John Maguire, BBC News, Somerset.
They're focusing on events at the Somme, but our cameras this morning on the border between France and Belgium, because the events happening there to mark Passchendaele, the Battle of Passchendaele. Our correspondent Robert Hall is there for us this morning. Robert, just set the scene for us there. What will be happening?
Yeah, indeed, Charlie. You'd stand here in this drizzle. You do think back to the final days of the Passchendaele battle, the Battle of Ypres, which lasted from the summer right through to November. On the 10th of November, 100 years ago today, Canadian soldiers finally captured the village of Passchendaele. They'd fought through dreadful conditions, 500,000 casualties over those few months. What you see here is something you haven't seen since the First World War. There will be 16 First World War vintage guns here, firing a 100-shot salute in memory of those who died at Passchendaele, and looking forward to the Remembrance Weekend. John Slough, can I interrupt you just for a second? John, you've helped to organise this. What were you trying to show? And as you perhaps, we'll run some black and white picture, if we may, of the First War while you tell us.
Well, the Battle of Passchendaele lasted for 3 months. It is without a doubt the bloodiest battle in the history of the Great War. And it was all-consuming. The mud, the rain, the various diseases that the soldiers had to suffer, as well as all the lead and iron that was flying.
So
through the air.
by setting this up, and you spent months planning this.
Oh yes, we've spent over 2.5 years doing it, and what we've attempted to do, and what we are succeeding on doing, is putting the largest number of Great War guns in line so that we can fire the 100-gun salute.
And that is in memory of those who died from a number of nations.
Oh yes, the Allied nations are all represented here today, except for India, which couldn't get here with a gun.
Right, I'm going to shoot up the line. Thank you very much, John, because I just want to have a very quick word with one of the teams. There are 64 different members of the gun crews here. Some of them are volunteers, some of them, as you saw with the Canadians there, are serving soldiers, and some of them serving soldiers with the British Army. Katie, you're commanding one of the detachments here. Just tell me who you represent, who you'll be commanding.
Good morning. Yes, we're here with E Battery from 1st Regiment Warhorse Artillery. Particularly poignant day for us because our battery was actually involved in the Battle of Passchendaele over 100 years ago.
What does it mean to your guys, some of whom, of course, young soldiers?
It means a lot, and I think we're always very mindful of what's gone on before us in the events of history, but days like today, and particularly tomorrow on Armistice, make us reflect even more, and we're incredibly proud to be both soldiers and be here.
It is an amazing sight, isn't it? Look behind us there.
It's an absolutely amazing sight, and probably one that we won't really get to see again. John Slough, the organiser of today, has done a fabulous job getting everyone together, and we're really glad to be here, especially with our own 13-pound gun, which is 102 years old, so really special for us.
Katie, thank you so much for talking to me. Well, they're getting ready to fire that salute. We're going to be filming it. We'll have it on BBC News during the day, but for now, from a very damp Lille, back to you.
Robert, thank you very much in the relatively poor weather there. Thank you. Time now is 8:58.